Um, Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Somto Ajuluchukwu of Animate Africa. Animate Africa is a collective which is determined and focused on the growth and development of the African animation industry for profits and for growth. Today, we have partnered with the Nollywood Week Film Festival in Paris towards curating a select number of animated films which will be screening at the Children's Pavilion at the festival, and also a panel session which is with the leading voices of children's content in animation. And we're so excited to be in conversation with these trailblazers and pace setters as we get to know about their projects, get to know about their companies, and get to know about their vision for African animation as regards to children's content. Um, in no particular order, I would go through each of my panelists as they get to introduce themselves and tell us a bit more about their projects and what they've been up to. So I would begin with Agnes. Agnes, can you please give me tell us a bit more about yourself and what you've been up to?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonto. It's an honor to be on this panel. So thank you very much for asking me to take part even. So hi, everyone. My name is Agnes. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Limitless. Limitless Studios is a media company that develops original IP for kids and families across the globe. Our flagship show is Oma Berry. And Oma Berry is a 3D animated kids show that's full of nursery rhymes and kids songs and educational learning for kids between the ages of 3 and 8. We launched Oma Berry back in February 2021 as a YouTube channel. It's a digital first IP, and we've seen great growth across that platform and others. We currently have over 150 million views on YouTube and over 300k subs since launching. And just to give you a bit of background into myself and I guess how Oma Berry came about, I started out in the UK working on TV production shows. So I was a TV producer in the UK, working for the likes of MTV and Channel 4, the BBC, etc. I worked across mainly entertainment and music shows. But during that time, I always had my eye on Africa. I was very much in love with African storytelling and what was happening over here. So in 2013, I decided to move to Lagos, which is where I'm originally from. So I moved here and I've been here ever since, for just over 11 years now. Moved here and really worked across the same type of field in terms of Nollywood and films and advertising. I was the head of production at Ndani TV for a number of years. I then settled down, got married and had kids. And it was at that point that I guess my eyes were just open to the kids and family and entertainment space. It wasn't really on my radar before I had my own kids. So when I had my son, I became very much aware of content that he was watching. And I was really surprised that the content there was nothing for him in terms of content where he could see himself and hear himself. And so I thought that was a huge shame. As a parent, I was like, wow, this is not good. Something needs to be done about this, And then as a media professional myself, I wanted to be part of the solution to that. So to cut a very long story short, I joined forces with the other co-founders of Limitless. This was in 2020, around the time of the pandemic. We formed Limitless and we created Oma Berry, launched the channel, as I said, in 2021. We're really, really pleased with what we've been able to achieve with it. It's loved by audiences and families across the globe, and it's something that we want to continue to do. We've been able to expand the IP from not just the YouTube channel, but also merchandise and original music albums, edtech, etc., etc. So that's a very long and short spiel about myself and Limitless and Oma Berry. And again, thanks for having me on the panel.
Well, thank you so much, Agnes. That's a really remarkable journey. We'll definitely love to have your merch at the shop. So let us know. I think we're gonna move on next to Mr. Muyiwa. Could you give us a bit of context into your journey and also what you're currently, been working on through the years as a veteran in the animation space in Nigeria.
Thank you, Somto. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today to talk about what is a passion and what I see as a life purpose. I am Muyiwa Kayode. I am CEO at a brand management company. It's called USP Brand Management. I am the founder of Lagos International Festival of Animation, which at the time we created it, it was a child of necessity, just like our animation series, Taido. I think I have a background in journalism, marketing communications, writing. I'm an author of 2 books on branding, and I play music. I'm an artist. And I found in animation a platform where I could find creative expression for my talents. I think the motivation for creating Taido is a similar journey to what Agnes just talked about, because I watched the content my children were watching, and I felt that there was a need to create our own animation. We had oral literature, tradition, and history in many parts of Africa. And at some point, it was becoming obvious that the younger generations were not connecting with that rich history and stories and culture that we have. And what better way to have them connect with those stories other than the digital platform and animation? And this was one of the considerations for creating Taido. We started working on Taido in 2009, and were able to eventually premiere the series on Africa Magic Family in 2015. And a couple of years after that, we now created a game show based on the animation series, which is the Taido game show, which has been running since 2017 on different Nigerian TV networks. The animation series itself, Adventures of Taido, is running on streaming platforms. We have several streaming platforms that is running this series. And we have also created the series in partnership with Arewa 24 Network. We created the series in Hausa language, and we are currently producing the series also in Yoruba language. And that will start broadcasting by the first week of June. And then we are going to be producing also in Igbo language, which should go on air in the last quarter of this year. And then by next year, we will go into the next phase of developing the series, which is what we call the African Adventures, Taido's African Adventures. Most of our episodes are based in Nigeria. The whole concept of Taido is a turtle that goes on an adventure to different places, and he's basically going around searching for knowledge and learning. But on his journeys, he makes friends, he learns about people, he learns about other people's cultures. And the whole concept is that we want to get children to enjoy African storytelling. In every episode of the show, there is some story that teaches wisdom and knowledge to children. And it is also exposing them to different cultures and for them to understand cultural diversity, for them to understand that people are different. And because you are different from me doesn't mean you are better or I am better. We are just different, and we need to respect those differences. And this is the universal message in the Total Taido series. So also, as a child of necessity, we started the Lagos International Festival of Animation in 2016. That is, it's in its 8th year this year, and now it holds every October. We received more than 1,000 entries for the festival from more than 100 countries. Last year, we had entries from 24 African countries. And I think what we're trying to do with the festival is also in alignment with what you're trying to do with Animate Africa. We're trying to create a platform for collaboration between animation studios across Africa, because we believe very strongly that collaboration is important to do big things. It's very difficult to do major projects on your own or as a single studio. You're going to need to work with a lot of different people with different skill sets. And that's one of the things Lefanima is trying to make happen. I think I'll pause here for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Muyiwa. Your journey is really inspiring, and it's a pleasure to have you here. An honor, in fact. Next on, I would move to Louisa of Kunda Kids to give us a deep dive into her journey and the projects she's been working on.
Thank you, Somto. Hi, everyone. I'm Louisa, co-founder of Kunda Kids. I follow and admire everybody here in my own way, so it's wonderful to meet you all virtually. So as I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Kunda Kids. We're a children's edtech and media company. We are involved in publishing children's content and stories, mobile apps, and currently have a leading 3D music-led animation called Kunda and Friends. Kunda actually means love in Ugandan. I'm Ugandan born and currently based in London. And our whole ethos is around taking African storytelling to a global audience. So the main issue that we're addressing as a business, and also as a mom and a parent, is the fact that children's content doesn't reflect the diversity of children that consume it. And I think quite similarly to what's been said, there is a very blatant gap in not only the children's content that's available, but the dynamics of the diversity and inclusion of the people that create it as well. So for us, it was really important to do something that centered on early education and the early foundations of children, kind of driving our experience first strategy on literacy, improving literacy, and also soft skills such as confidence and progressive African values. A little bit about me. I'm a former journalist and innovation specialist at Unilever and Cambridge University Press. And I think just as a person and as a business, we're really excited about how storytelling and content can shape the next generation of global citizens.
Wow, that's very concise, and thank you so much. Your work with Kunda Kids has been very inspiring in how innovative animation can be and scalable as well. And of course, we have Vanessa Sinden of Triggerfish, of course, who is a titan in the industry. Can you give us a little bit of introduction of yourself as well, your journey, and also the projects that you've been working on so far with Triggerfish?
Hi, everybody. Thank you. It's so wonderful to be on a panel talking about original African animation. It's always a privilege to do that, especially with people who are making great content. My daughter loves Kunda and Friends, and we often watch it. And she's 3, so she's at that age where it's just singing and having a good time is a big part of her day. I started in the film industry, specifically in live action, and I didn't take a natural journey into animation as people do now. Early 2000s, there wasn't really an animation industry that was thriving in South Africa. I'm in Cape Town, South Africa. Triggerfish as a studio started in Cape Town, and there wasn't actually an industry that was thriving. There was commercial services or adverts. mostly as the work, but nothing in the form of original African animation. And my journey into animation was kind of, I fell into it and started working with Triggerfish 15 years ago. It's a 28-year-old animation studio that originally was in stock frame, and that commercial work, our love for stock frame is something that really carries very strong in our DNA, with Sesame Street and Takalani Sesame as our first clients. But I joined the team 15 years ago with the start of their first 3D stereoscopic animated film adventures in Zambia, and I produced that with the team, and then moved on to do Kunda, their second film. And it's been such a wonderful journey, and I absolutely love animation because it really is a wonderful way to tell our stories in such a unique way. Obviously, as an African studio, our studio was full of South African talent. Pre-pandemic, we worked mostly from South Africa, but you know, that's changed in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's wonderful. And I'm sure we'll talk about what that looks like a little later. But as a studio, we've transformed in the last 5 years. My personal experience in the last 8 years in animation has been by far the most exciting, because it's really pronounced by accelerator programs that we've been able to launch from Triggerfish, and essentially accelerator programs in the form of a lab, and the key to those were identifying talent on the continent and recognizing there wasn't opportunity for people to tell distinct stories, and diverse people to tell those stories. And so it was the start of the Story Lab with Disney was an initiative which I launched with Triggerfish, and was the start of a very exciting 8 years. And I've run 4 accelerator programs through Triggerfish in that time, focused on writing, focused on TV and feature film development, focused on storyboarding, and focused on directing, most recently with Kazaza Module Generation 5. And it's been so exciting to see talent take this center stage and to stay in that space, and to not only do their first film or write on a first season of Super Team 4, but to continue working in the animation space and to continue taking big steps into key roles, which essentially will then shape the industry from the continent. And so I've been privy to that whole journey and to support a lot of talent in the last 8 years. And that for me is the privilege, is to support and work alongside talent who find center stage and tell their fantastic and distinct stories. Triggerfish is a 28-year-old company, but as a South African studio, we've had to shape a lot of industry. And so Animation South Africa was born out of Triggerfish. We need an industry organization to tie people together. We need to share knowledge. We need to grow. We need to grow an industry. We need studios to grow. We need to do our own original work. All of that growth has happened over the 28 or so years. We've, as a company, not only produce animation, original animation, we do some commercial services work as well, but we also have a foundation which has scholarships, over 80 scholarships for students going into animation school, and we support them as they go on to Goblan to study abroad, and that's been very big for us. We have big internship programs. We have big a free online academy resource where we wanted to see people take big steps without having to put big money into training, especially students who couldn't afford it. And we didn't want that to be limiting. And so not only are we a studio doing original IP, but we're very much a part of growing an industry from South Africa. And it's been a privilege to then go on to produce amazing content. I've been a part of producing the teams on Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes, which is a Disney Junior Hasbro E1 collaboration. It was originally from the Story Lab. It's a series I developed with the team and produced in the pre-production and development space. And then we handed over to our French partners on this. Super Team 4 was another of my babies, where I worked with Malenka Molendema very closely from 2015 on the seed of an idea, which we really pitched our hearts out to Netflix, and they picked it up as Super Team 4. And we're originally with Mama K's Team 4, but that show was quite an amazing show for us because it was quite groundbreaking. It was a show about 4 Black girls from Zambia who were going to save the world on a budget. The only problem, or the snag that we had, was that we didn't have many Black writers in the animation space, female writers who were going to write the show, and that was a problem for us. You know, we needed this show, the series, to be written from a very key and specific perspective. So we went out and found writers through a writers lab, and that for me was so special because we were able to work with 22 writers, help them transition into animation. We then chose 8 writers to work on season 1 and season 2 of the show with Netflix. And what a joy to see those women rise up. 2 of them are directing in Kazazimoto Generation Fire. Most of them are still working in animation and writing. And what a pleasure. And then also developing and producing Kazazimoto Generation Fire with a big team was also such a privilege to watch 15 directors own the stage in 10 short films from the continent. So that's been my, sorry, it was a bit long-winded, but that's a little bit of my experience, and it's been such a joy for me over the last 8 years.
I mean, it's been amazing. I think one thing that is really, really mind-blowing about that journey is I know when Mama K Super 4 came out of the Triggerfish Story Lab, and you know, to see that translate all the way to become a series on Netflix was just, you know, it was beautiful to see, you know, and to see. I remember when we even pitched the concept art when we first opened our studio back like 6 years ago, the Agege one, and just to see that it was still so original to the source material, even through all that time, was really, really brilliant to see that translate that way. And just knowing that projects can come from a projects can come from a development lab, and you know, and you know, go into market, and that's really nice to see. So I think I'm going to dive into the next part of the conversation, where we might need to give, it's great that our introductions were very lengthy and we dive deep into our DNA and why we do what we do on our journeys. It was supposed to be that way. But now going into the questions, I would like if our answers are a little bit more brief, because that way we can circle around the whole panel. So I think I would love to begin with understanding the dynamic of children animated content in Africa, right? Now, we've just like we said, one thing that was common was saying everybody here watched cartoons, and then we all watched cartoons growing up. We watched the Courage the Cowardly Dog, we watched the Looney Tunes, and these cartoons weren't essentially in African contexts for kids, but we grew up on these cartoons either way. Like Courage the Cowardly Dog is 2 old people, and then this little scared dog. Like, where there are no children in the cartoon, So how do the children relate to the story? We watch Ed, Ed and Eddie, which is a bunch of skater boys looking for jawbreakers, and God knows what jawbreakers actually meant, right? Or we watch Johnny Bravo, who was flexing his muscles in front of every single woman he would find, right? So that generation of 90s cartoons, and then coming into cartoons like Mordecai or Adventure Time, or it's the Western context of children's content is quite different from the African perspective of what children should be watching. So I would definitely love to understand how you navigate your dynamic in formulating your content, in which you have done so brilliantly that it has this international appeal, but it still keeps the soul of the African culture. So I think I would love to begin this question with Louisa, and then jump right next to Vanessa, and then from Vanessa, Agnes can take that, and then we can end with Muyiwa.
Great, thanks, Somto. I think I laugh when I think about the kind of cartoons that we actually were growing up with in the 90s and how we've managed to be, sometimes non-violent and progressive humans, because actually when we think about the content that was on screen when we were children, it's very crazy compared to what we experience now. So my personal take on it is that sort of the core principles and values that Kunda Kids has been founded on as far as representing Africa in children's content is trying to be intentional about celebrating and normalizing African culture and African heritage in content without it being too centered on kind of a woe me narrative. And that's something that we are very active with at Kunda Kids. I found that as a parent, similar to what Agnes mentioned, as a parent, like a new parent in lockdown, exploring the world of children's content, I found that the emphasis on Blackness, the emphasis on African culture, whilst it's important to highlight how beautiful our skin is, how beautiful our hair is, if all content is like that, children begin to wonder why. Why is it that in other books and other content, cartoons, other children are just playing and having fun and being part of adventures, but for us, I'm always being reminded that I should focus on how I look and about the politics of my race and involvement. So I think we really wanted to take a proactive stance in celebrating African culture, celebrating adventures, normalizing our stories and our existences, and trying not to be too swept into the diversity and inclusion agenda in some of the ways it's been politicized and in some cases even manipulated, especially in the efforts to try and provide more inclusive content. And I think, as you mentioned, Vanessa, being able to be authentic about who is writing these stories, what experiences you're bringing to your writer's room is really, really key, as opposed to thinking that it just starts with having an Afrobeat tune and a brown character. There's so much cultural nuance that is necessary to kind of make the progressive change that we want to make. So I think from our perspective, that's absolutely been central and absolutely been key. And we know that children's content is their window to the world because they get their foundational values from their home, their family, their parents in the immediate. But the media they consume is how they interpret what's happening in the world. It's how inferiority and superiority complexes are generated at such an early age. So I think that from the outside, whilst it looks like, and it is great that we create fun content, and it seems like being in the animation and cartoon spaces, lots of fun and creativity, there's actually a huge responsibility that comes with how we are molding the minds of the next generation who will be making decisions on our behalf and probably looking after us in our old age very soon. So we have to be very responsible about what we're teaching them about themselves, what we're teaching them about the world. And particularly because in so many cases, we're rewriting and reinventing the narrative of what it means to be African, what it means to be of African heritage, and what Africa means in its contribution on a global stage. So yeah, that comes with a lot of mindfulness. And I think personally from Kunda Kids and with the creation of Kunda and Friends, we've been quite mindful of that, wanting to celebrate heritage, wanting to celebrate culture, but also just normalizing children's experiences and not putting children's experiences in too overly political formats.
I mean, Louisa, that's so well said, and it's interesting to just take a step back and go, well, all of this is what then shaped kids' entertainment, light, fluffy, fun, and normal. From our perspective, working on Super Team 4 and Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes, it was just some little action points we took to make sure that the stories and the source material and the team working on it were doing so as authentically as possible. We made sure that from the get-go, scripts were written by a diverse room of writers. For Super Team 4, it was an all-female writers' room, never been done before in Hollywood, let alone it being a writers' room full of women of color. Is an absolute first, and that was so essential for us to get right. We worked on all of our big 3 series, recent ones, with cultural consultants throughout the entire process from scripting to finished final product. We really wanted to inject and have points where we stopped and looked at material. You know, if it was Moremi, that was a Nigerian short film by Shafela Coker, and Andrew McNally, we stopped and we looked at the legend and the myth of Moremi and how it was interpreted and how it was portrayed. Was it done accurately? We do that across all of our shows to stop, and because as a South African studio, we don't hold the keys or the knowledge for all of that. And so bringing on board as many people as possible to make sure a story from Nigeria was as accurate and specific be represented as possible was important. Super Team 4 coming from Zambia, we made sure we had a huge library available for all crew from beginning to end, for animation, for sound design, for every part of animation. We made sure people who weren't Zambian to infuse their day with music, cultural references, clips from young Zambian influencers who are representative of the Super Team 4. And we made sure that everyone who worked on the show felt like they were immersed in Zambian culture. We make sure that when we do voiceover, that it is with talent hopefully from that country as far as possible. I've recorded in 9 countries on all original content and 9 African countries. And it's been interesting to see how we cast, how we bring in voice directors to help guide these sessions, voice dialect coaches. All of that has to be a part of the process. Obviously, key to that is that partners who are greenlighting production have the appetite for this, of which Super Team 4, thankfully, Netflix had a huge appetite to make sure that it was very Zambian flavor, visually, tasting, sounding. Thumper the Great did the original title track for the show. So in every single part of the show and all of our other shows, we made sure that we had touch points where people were brought in and who owned part of that show. With Kazazi Moto, we did that for each short film. You know, if it was Zulu or Ugandan film, it was really, we made sure that we stayed true to the creator's original idea and why they were telling that story. And so it's so important to do that. It costs money to do that, and not every single partner who can greenlight a series or a feature film has the money or the appetite for that risk. But it is absolutely essential to do that if we're going to be representing a different cultural group to our own. If not, then it really is, it is a question mark of why we would do that and why we wouldn't want to represent that culture fully. So yeah, those are some of the things we did as Triggerfish on our current 3 series.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, Louisa and Vanessa have kind of said it all, but it's definitely a word that both of them mentioned was the authenticity of the content and the storytelling, which is really, really key. And I think that viewers, you know, whether it's adults or kids, they know if you're just kind of doing something for the sake of doing it, or whether it's or whether it is authentic. So in terms of Limitless and Omar Berry, we are very you know, we are an African studio. The content that we produce is originally African as well, just in terms of our makeup. You know, everybody who works on the show is like understands the culture because they are Africans, most of them living within Africa as well. And that goes, I think that goes a long way in the outputs of the content that you are producing. With us, you know, the keywords that we say our content needs to achieve is to educate, to entertain, and to empower our young viewers. And you can see that thread of each of those elements in the content that we produce. Another thing I was going to say again, which Louisa has already mentioned, is just about being responsible content creators as well. So understanding the responsibility that we have to present content that reflects the world of these kids as well. Again, you know, if what they're seeing on screen is not real to the lives that they're actually living as well, there's that disconnect that's there. So even with Omar Berry, you know, we make sure that it's not just black faces that they're seeing, you know, it's not just brown colored people that they're seeing, because that's not necessarily the world that these kids are living in. There's, you know, diversity and multicultural, you know, and so all of that is factored into the content as well. Another element of things that we do as well is actual focus groups with parents and teachers who consume our content as well, just to see how the content is being received by viewers. Of course, it's not always the kids that are, you know, signing in to watch the channel. It's the parents that get their kids to watch it, and so we need to engage with the parents as well and ensure that we are creating content that that appeals to them and then also to their kids as well. But yeah, I mean, I won't go over what everyone else has just said because it's exactly the same, but authenticity is key. And even, you know, kids as young as 2, 3, they see that, they notice that. It's not just grown-ups and adults that want to see content that is true to their world, but it's kids as well. Thank you.
All right, that's all well said. I recall that we had an interactive session with the officials of the Federal Ministry of Arts, Culture, and Creative Economy. And one of the things we emphasized was the need for the ministry to, in terms of formulating their policies, to support the creation of content for children. Because the first thing the first challenge I think we have in Africa is we simply are not making enough original content for children in Africa. And the fallout of this is the extent to which the children are exposed to foreign content, which for the most part, you know, is not necessarily the best in terms of what this content imparting in terms of the kind of habits and knowledge. I mean, it's very common to see kids trying to jump around the house because they've been watching Spider-Man and all of that stuff. Kids are impressionable. They see what they see. It's a huge influence on their mentality, the way they think, and they think that what they see is what they should emulate. And that is really not healthy if they are exposed to what they are not supposed to be exposed to. And that is why generally in content, we have age restriction for certain kinds of content. And unfortunately, we don't, that is not to come out with cartoons, because we see a lot of cartoons that are not suitable for children, that are being shown to children. And another thing I've noticed is that whoever came up with the idea that children's television channels should run 24 hours needs to be interrogated, because I just can't find the sense in it. And you find parents struggling to get the kids to go to bed when they're supposed to go to bed, because the cartoon channels are on 24 hours. And it simply doesn't make sense to me. And it's not even like what is being shown on these channels are 100% suitable for children. So what we can do in our own little corners is to create content that is wholesome, that is appropriate, and as, like you said, responsible content creators ensure that what we are putting out there is socially responsible. With Total Taido, we try to create content that make children take pride in their African identity, content that shows them an image of themselves in animation, and content that connects them with their history and culture. And the fact that Black history did not begin with the slave trade, and content that exposes them to the richness of their history, the empires, the wealth, and a whole lot of positive things that will make you take pride in your African identity. You know, so I think there is a pressing need to make more content for children in Africa. so that we can push this content out there. And when they see content that reflects their image, it connects with them better. When they see kids like themselves talking about things they are familiar with, I think it resonates better with them. And that is the only way we can change the narrative. Thank you.
Oh, that was really powerful. I think, whoa, I think that was that's enough to make a good panel. You know, just that perspective alone across the table is very revolutionary. I really think that there's a renaissance period about to happen in the animation industry, and Africa is about to take that mantle. And it all begins from the kids. And that's why it was so important when I was thinking about this session that I was like, it has to focus on kids' content. We have to start from the beginning. You know, we have to start from the roots and then take it up from there. Okay. Our next point in this conversation is another one that takes us deeper. It takes us out of where we are now and it takes us back in. I was at Meet Junior and I was at this conference, I was at this keynote by Somto's Mind, Don't Fail Me Now. It was by this company that does, they have a lot of children's applications. PBS. It was by PBS Kids. And there was a lot of conversation about children's content beyond the screen. And all of us are here at animation producers. And but it was interesting for me to know how you see your intellectual property, because we're not just animation companies, we're intellectual property companies. You know, we're everything companies, as I would like to express. You know, when people ask me what I do, I say I do everything. I do clothes, I do experiences, I make cartoons, you know, I make comic books, like whatever character that you're looking at. If there was a chair that becomes really popular, then I do furniture, right? So I begin to think about it, and I really would love to know what our vision is or how we see our intellectual property in our individual organizations translate beyond the screen, and in what ways beyond the screen is it impactful to the African child. For this, I would start from Mr. Muyiwa. Let's try to keep our answers brief because we got really passionate and we got a little bit overboard. Because the information is so vital, I don't want to have to edit out. So I start from Mr. Muyiwa, and then I would flow on to Vanessa. And then I would then go into Agnes and end it with Louisa. Okay, so please take it away.
All right, thank you, Somto. From my perspective, to answer your question, I'll simply say that I am a brand person. My training and practice as a brand consultant is what is shaping a lot of the things we are doing with the Total Taido brand. We do not really see ourselves as creating content, but as creating and building a brand. And that approach informs everything we do, you know. So we're very intentional about the different dimensions of the brand Total Taido. And it's a long journey, it's a process. And we know that at a certain time, this is the next phase of development for the brand. And when you look at your IP as a brand and you manage it as a brand, that shapes a lot of the things you do in terms of IP protection, which in branding we call trademark registration, trademark protection, and all of that. And in terms of brand extension, you may want to talk about merchandising, apps and games and all of that. It's called brand extension. And in terms of brand positioning, you know that, okay, this is my target, this is my market, and these are the people, this is the core message I want to get across. In terms of brand value proposition, why would people want to patronize my brand? What makes it unique? What makes it different? What gives it its own unique identity? These are all elements of branding, and in applying these elements to what we do, we are able to grow the franchise strategically. We're able to focus on our markets. We're able to create messaging that resonates with our market, and we are able to use brand elements to bond with our primary target audience, which are the children. And some of those brand elements include the things that give you a unique identity. And those things are, how do you appeal to the sense of sound, of smell, of sight, in terms of the visuals, and the ears, in terms of what do they hear, the music, is it sing along, dance along, and all of those things. These are all elements of the brand. And this is how we are able to develop the total Taido franchise in a way that it is not just content, it goes beyond content. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, you couldn't be more right yeah, I mean, it's so interesting that your journey has been from brand and then creating content. It's such an interesting way to actually create kids content. And so I think how that leads into Triggerfish and our experiences, we've come about it from the animation original content side, where we create animation and wonderful stories and worlds, but we haven't really in the past been experts at creating brand or being able to take our IP off screen. And so we've always relied on partners to do that for us. And because Triggerfish has a global audience focus on all of our films, on all of our short films and TV series, you know, how do you create something that's off screen that you can then either monetize for the brand or for the company, because all of this is so expensive to do. And so it's extremely, you know, you have to be really skilled in creating a brand off screen and creating a life off screen. And it does take a full-time focus to get that right, aside from making great animation. So as Triggerfish, we've really been excellent on one side of the coin, where we definitely, you know, we've tried licensing with our feature film combo, and we tried to see what that looked like. You know, our films have been dubbed in over 30 languages around the world, and we've tried licensing and we've tried our hand at marketing our own films, but it does take expertise. And so, you know, we're just getting better at it. You know, with Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes, which is being screened at the festival this week, we partnered with Hasbro and E1 Entertainment, who are really huge brand off-screen experts. You know, Peppa Pig, PJ Masks, this is what they do in terms of consumer strategy. And so we've leaned into their knowledge and experience as we built the Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes content. Interestingly enough, the journey to creating animation is so different. Kiya went through many rounds of designs with marketing. So our development and pre-prod schedule was massive, because we had to get it right at a marketing consumer strategy level before we even then produced animation. So for us, that was a huge eye-opener. We got to experience that for the first time with a big toy company. It isn't our strength or our skill set. And so it was extremely interesting to see that journey and to make sure that as soon as Kiya launched on Disney Junior and on YouTube, that social media influencers were involved. YouTube was a very big strategy for Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes to make sure that the show was available globally, freely, outside of Disney Junior. And so that was really interesting to watch their strategy on that. And
I'm very mindful that you have to think holistically of a brand. And Kiya and the Kimoja Heroes was an interesting example where, you know, and that journey was so different to our journey with our films, where we are figuring it out still. How do you monetize? How do you bring life to something off screen? You know, the big studios that do this all the time, you know, this $100 million feature film often is just an advert for toy sales and consumer strat, which is interesting. But all of that to say that the market is at a very interesting time. And I think we're all having to relook at what it looks like to take a brand to YouTube, what it looks like to take a brand to kids, and to be able to make sure that you can keep creating content. It requires money to do that. And to make that business model work is very challenging. You know, looking into things like Roblox and platforms and spaces where kids are creating their own content, we have to get our heads into that game space and possibly figure out what that looks like for our IP. I don't have any answers. We're experimenting as Triggerfish on all of our IP, and watch the space. I hope that we have tried some things and we've succeeded in some things in the next 5 years.
Yeah. And to add to that, yeah, in regards to Oma Berry, it was definitely part of our business model at Limitless when we, you know, came up with the idea for the business, came up with the idea for the IP. We had all these other areas on our roadmap that we were gonna start to execute, you know, at certain times within the lifespan of the IP. So obviously not being just a digital first YouTube channel, but wanting to go into merchandise, into original music, into gaming, into books, you know, so all these other areas are definitely and was definitely part of the plan when we first launched. But as Vanessa said, you know, a lot of these things take funding, right? And so in terms of how soon you can actually roll out and execute on these different areas is another story altogether. But I do think that African brands and African IPs need to learn from what, you know, our Western counterparts are doing. You know, Vanessa also mentioned Peppa Pig, you know, there's Cocomelon, Paw Patrol. I'm trying to think of all the shows that my son watches, you know, like there's so many of them and they have it all rolled out in terms of the toys, you know, in terms of the books, in terms of the theme parks, right? And so I do believe that that's something that that builds on the strength of the IP, and also depending on the IP strength, you are able to then execute in all those other areas as well. So yeah, I think at Limitless we're really excited to continue to you know, ramp up our efforts in those areas. I do believe that partners and investors of African IP kind of need to understand the value of IP more so, and the worth of African IP. I feel like that's one of the roadblocks, or at least the challenges that we've encountered so far in terms of, you know, seeing a brand like Oma Berry, seeing the kind of numbers that we're doing on YouTube, but yet not understanding how that translates into an offline event or into a book or into a game, etc., etc. And so yeah, I guess that's another part of the discussion, but yeah, it's certainly an area in which African brand creators need to kind of learn more so on. Yeah, that's it from my point of view. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Agnes, I'm so glad that you pointed out the fact around investors understanding the value of the IP. I feel like that is a conversation that definitely needs to be had for sure.
For sure.
I think from my perspective, there are lots of big, fun and memorable brands that come and go. But what I've really been trying to focus on for Kunda and Friends is what makes a timeless brand. And, you know, what is it about what we're creating that we feel will stand the test of time, that as adults, I can still be wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, or that there are certain sentiments that were embedded in my childhood about these characters and what they mean to me, that have been able to remain consistent through decades. So from that perspective, I've been very intentional to ensure that we have an experience first IP, and that we are creating something that's great creatively, but really hits a lot of emotional touch points. So how that's executed, for example, It's no surprise that we're very intentional about having cinematic premieres, even though we're a YouTube show. And we did that intentionally to sort of set the experiential expectation, almost as if it were a Pixar movie, or if it was coming from DreamWorks or Disney, so that once you've experienced Kunda and Friends in the cinema, it will change your relationship to how you see it when you go back home and you watch it on your device, or you watch it on your TV. And I think, coming from an innovation background, really understanding behavioral economics and what moves people, especially on an emotional level, the aesthetics, the positioning, and even the partnerships has been, something that we've looked at as well. And back to my first point around getting investors understanding the value of the IP, based on what Agnes mentioned. It is also about having the freedom to fail fast as a creative company, and even actually having the luxury to fail at all, which seems to be a luxury that we're not always quite afforded as African-based businesses, and especially as startups. So being able to break the rules and originality cannot come without trial and error. So I think being able to grow within a business environment that allows that to happen and thrive. And certainly, as far as building a strong brand goes, for us, it's being experience-led, which has really given us a differentiating factor.
Okay, that's those are very insightful points, and it's really given us a deep dive into the power of intellectual property and how the cartoons that we create are beyond the screen. Both as an experiential tool for children and as a commercial tool for business, in terms of franchise expansion and all of that. Now, looking into a topic that I want us to just cut across very briefly, and it's, what is the role of parents in children's content? And I would start from Agnes, and then I would go to Louisa. From Louisa, I'm going to touch base with Mr. Muyiwa, and then finally have Vanessa Sinden give us her perspective. So.
Yeah, I certainly think that the parents' role is huge when it comes to children's content. I mentioned it in, I think, one of the other answers that I said, in terms of a lot of the times it's the parents who are attracted to your content and they show it to their kids. Of course, you're not gonna, I guess, market directly to kids, although you do also, but you get what I mean. It's the kids who show it's the parents who show the content to their kids. So, and as a parent myself, I'm always I'm always shifting through, content to see what I want my kids to watch. So I think as parents, we do, I guess, put a lot of the emphasis on the content creators, but it is down to the parents as well to ensure that, you are choosing the right type of content that you would want your kids to watch. So being very involved in, I guess, what kind of content your kid is watching. There's something called co-watching as well. I don't know if that's the right term, but basically when parents and kids watch shows together, an example of a show that has been very successful with co-watching is Bluey, which I'm sure a lot of people know because it appeals to the parent and it appeals to the kid as well. So yeah, I mean, I hope I'm answering your question from the right angle. I guess you're asking the importance of a parent's choice, or an importance of parents being involved in what their kids are watching, and it's very important. And yeah, I'm going to keep the answer short for this one. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. That hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, certainly, I think it was already mentioned how important parents are as being the gatekeepers. And I've taken a lot of inspiration from Sesame Street, being when I was, at the early stages of being a parent and enjoying Sesame Street because it had people that I listened to, from like Erykah Badu and all these different artists actually involved in singing the children's music. And at some point I was like, who is this appealing to? Is this appealing to my child, or am I, because at this point I feel like I'm watching this program for me. And I think understanding the relationship that the parents and guardians and even educators have, and getting them involved as well, is something that absolutely can't be missed. I think, although the children are our end consumer, you know, that the parents are our first sort of consumer, and they are the gatekeepers. And once we get buy-in from mum and dad and teachers, it's great to get, you know, their buy-in, because they influence the children and how they feel about the programs. I know that there's been a lot of popularity over shows like Cocomelon, for example, but then I've seen a lot of frustration from parents about the show too. And I find it curious, that dynamic between the child loving the program and then the adult completely despising it at the same time. It's not a great dynamic to have, and certainly not a sustainable dynamic to have as an IP. So I think definitely getting buy-in from the parents and understanding their key role, and also having that emotional attachment to the IP is key.
Good. I think one of the challenges we have is that we have children as our primary target audience, but we have to campaign to the parents, because while the children influence purchase decisions, the final decision is still with the parents, you know, so we have to campaign to them. And one of the things we do is, like, during the holidays, we launched the campaign with the message, watch what they watch. And this is just talking to parents to pay attention to what the kids are watching, and to ensure that they're watching appropriate content, because we know how busy a lot of us parents are. And sometimes we just, you know, leave them to watch what they enjoy watching, and believing that, okay, that is keeping them occupied. I have this to do, I have that to do. So we have to find a balance and find a way to ensure that we are monitoring the kind of content the children consume. Thank you.
And I don't have much more to add, but what an exciting time where decisions are in the hands of parents about what content is watched or consumed, and then what content gets greenlit. And I still hope to see the connection more of audiences' decisions impacting where money is spent. I think there's still an interesting chain of flow to how productions get greenlit. But an exciting time can only get more exciting, where we're being very mindful about what our kids consume, and from diversity to themes and genre and age appropriateness. And gone are the days where you literally have one free to air channel, which whatever's on TV you watch, which is how I grew up. And my parents weren't involved in those decisions. It was simply the only thing to watch in the afternoon. But a very exciting time, because what that means is, as original IP creators, we're going to be able to cater to audiences. So we really have to be in tune to parents and to kids, understanding kids. You know, when we develop shows, we bring on an early educational consultants to help us navigate this space, to make sure that our shows are current, and that we're really hitting those points in kids' content where it really makes sense, and it is fun. You know, Bluey is a great example of just a fun show that has taken the world by storm. Gabby's Dollhouse as well is also an interesting case study, because it was a completely Netflix release. You know, broadcasters and streamers having a very different release strategy, and just watching those shows and how they've been super successes is going to be good. So just as content producers, to encourage other creators to watch the trends and to watch what people are doing and how decisions are made, and that will help shape how content is created.
Yeah, I think what is really special about this group is that everyone in this panel is a parent, so even have a deeper perspective into, you know, what they want their kids to watch and how they want that consumed. Final question, what are the production challenges in producing animation in Africa? What are we still facing? What are we still dealing with? And second aspect to that question is, what is the status of the animation industry in Africa from our perspective? The good, the bad, the beautiful, you know, because nothing is ugly here. Nothing is ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our production challenges really, sadly, are very centered on capital, right? Because I was actually going to start with talent and upskilling, but that also comes back to capital. And when we talk about the opportunities in Africa's creative economy, it really starts with how much are we investing in terms of our time, in terms of finances, in terms of learning institutions. We can't have a conversation about upskilling creative talent in Africa without having a conversation about how is this being funded in a sustainable way. So, and touching, but you know, back onto this point that I can't bold and underline enough what Agnes said, it's about understanding how IPs work and how to even analyze and set the right expectation for growth and traction. And I think there is also not enough education in the investment space in Africa about how to support and nurture media companies and businesses like ours. So honestly, that is the first and foremost challenge that we experience. And there's so much more that could be improved, but we can't get there without addressing this from my perspective.
Yeah. Is it my turn? It is my turn. I would basically just copy everything Louisa just said. Funding, 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 more funding. Besides that, I will also add infrastructure, which obviously could be improved with more funding. But, you know, living in Africa, living in Nigeria specifically, which is where I can only speak about, you know, the lack of power, the cost of fuel, the cost of data, like all of these things affect my team, who are based mainly within Lagos. Transport costs, like all of these things, the challenges, the daily challenges that we face living within Lagos affects their output and their productivity. So besides funding, I'll also say infrastructure challenges, you know, to the location where we are based, Africa. And I think the second part of your question, I'm not sure if you wanted us to answer them back to back in terms of the current state of the industry, or is that the next part?
Yeah, you could merge both. You could jumble
Okay.
both.
The status of the industry. Quickly, I'd say, I mean, I think we're in, even though I just went through the challenges that we face, I think we're at a really exciting time, really, really exciting time where the eyes of the world in terms of animation is upon Africa. I do believe that people want to hear and see more African stories, which is great for us because it shows that our audience is growing. Our audience is not just within Africa, but it is global. So, but yeah, I mean, there are challenges. Again, I've mentioned that quite a bit now. But I definitely think that the future is bright and that there is huge opportunities for animators and creatives within Africa. I think that, you know, the likes of Nollywood and Afrobeats has really, really helped us because people are looking towards Africa for, you know, for creativity. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. I'd love to add that a huge challenge for anyone on the African continent or even a developing continent where animation is growing is the opportunity and the luxury to fail fast. I think Louisa and Agnes mentioned that earlier, where you know, if you look at the French animation industry, it's thriving. It's so well supported by state. You look at the Canadian or the Irish industries now, the UK tax incentives are even more attractive for businesses in the UK. These things help an industry thrive and grow, and it allows studios and artists and directors and writers to experiment and try again. And failing fast is what is essential to producing world-class content. We haven't had that luxury. As Triggerfish, we had to our being able to keep the lights on was dependent on us doing a hit, and we had no opportunity to fail. We had to get it right, and so we did 2 films back to back. It was, you know, a large part of our crew were burnt out. I took a 2-year sabbatical after doing 2 films back to back. Those are the costs of not having the luxury to fail fast. I think not having that luxury means we haven't had an opportunity to do TV series. Even as Triggerfish, we've stepped into TV series at high-end production value, but it is still very much a big, challenging, daunting step into that world of TV series, because it is all driven by the bottom line and what it costs to create per minute of animation, and to do that really fast. The East are churning out masses of hours of animation for TV because they can do that super fast and have pipeline for that. On the African continent, we haven't gotten that right yet. We have great shows. You know, some of the panelists are producing. Super Sema has been an interesting show piece as well to add to this. And those are all success stories, but it's still very challenging to do a TV series from Africa. Even a 10-part anthology for Kazazimoto, we had to use some studios abroad in order to produce 10 films. We did an analysis on the continent of which studios we could work with that had capacity, that had experience, that had, and all of that was done. And we were very excited about opportunities for African studios to make all 10 films. Unfortunately, client didn't have an appetite to try and to give it a go. There wasn't an opportunity to fail fast. If it failed, it was a big fail. And so that unfortunately means whoever's paying the bill, what appetite for risk they have in you trying to do something solely from Africa. As Triggerfish, we've often been criticized for not completely doing all of our productions from South Africa. And it is such a challenging conversation because we would love to do that. But it takes years and years and years to grow an industry, and it takes opportunity and experience to fail fast and to get things right. And so though that's a big challenge for me, but I know that we've made huge progress. You know, 10 years ago, we weren't doing Iwaju from Nigeria, even though a large part of that was produced abroad. You know, we've not done Super Team Folk, Kizazimoto, so we've seen huge success. I'm very positive and optimistic about our future and where we're headed. We just need to take our time, produce excellent content. I'd love to encourage producers to make sure that when they're bidding or scoping on projects, they do so with in a measured way. I definitely would love to encourage producers to maybe under-promise and over-deliver as a way of sort of as a theory of delivering content. I think, you know, we need to do a lot of content well, and we need to deliver strong content where people are happy and we haven't blown budgets or we haven't had to contract because delivery hasn't happened from the continent. And I've been experienced to all of this. And I'd love to remain positive about our future and about the studios who are creating from the continent. But I also want to encourage them to be mindful of bidding and scoping and delivery as key. If we're competing against other countries from the East who are delivering content like this super fast, you know, we're going to have to be mindful of so much, and let alone the bottom line. You know, Somto, you were talking earlier about AI, and that's a whole big conversation in itself in order to be more cost efficient in delivery. Gosh, what an interesting time to be alive. But what I do know is that Africans are resilient and never give up, and actually often never say no. So we're certainly going to find our way through this, and we're certainly going to produce huge firsts like we have in the last 10 years. So I'm very excited.
Right. I think there's little to add to what's already been said, because some of the challenges still come back to funding. If we are talking about distribution, which is one of the areas we need to improve. It still comes back to funding. And I think there is a need for us in our respective countries to find ways to lobby our government to formulate policies that are friendlier to the creative economy. In Nigeria, for example, we don't really have a proper animation school, and that is not good at all. And I think the earlier we have that, the better. In terms of manpower development, there are certain areas, there are certain skill sets required in animation that that are still not quite properly developed. So the state of animation generally across the continent is kind of still at an infancy because we still have a long way to go. And in order to do that, it's not just funding alone. I think we need to be more visible. Before the Animation Nigeria group was formed in Nigeria, the majority of people didn't even know that we had animators in Nigeria. And even you'll be surprised, producers in Nollywood, many of them work and where they require animation content in their films, they just didn't know where to go or where to get it from. And then that's a similar thing goes for visual effects, So I think there is a need for us to be more visible, create more awareness about animation. And that way we can also attract private investors into the industry when they see the value in it, when we make them understand how viable the animation industry is, then we can attract investment from the private sector. And that can, help in terms of addressing the funding challenges also.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been so informative and this has been so powerful. I want to give a special thank you to everyone for joining us for this panel session. Louisa, Agnes, Mr. Muyiwa, Vanessa, thank you so much for indulging us, for sharing your knowledge with us and your experiences, and the journey of your companies and yourselves as professionals. I cannot wait for this to be part of the program at the NollywoodWeek Film Festival and for people to get to watch this on repeat. And also experience your wonderful films, which have done so much for our community, for our continent, and for the world at large. So I put this as an end. We can say a big goodbye to everyone, and I'll catch you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys. Great to meet you all. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.